Young and the Restless spoilers Friday's full episodes February 13, 2026. As the crisis deepened, the urgency in Genoa City shifted into something sharper, more focused, pushing Abby Newman, Devin Winters, Sharon Newman, and Detective James Burrow onto a private jet bound for New Mexico. The news that Mariah's vehicle had been spotted again had electrified the air around them, tightening every heartbeat on the plane. Abby and Devin sat together, united in fear, and holding tightly to the hope that Dominic was still close enough to reach, close enough to save, before the emotional damage became irreversible. Behind them, Sharon maintained a fragile composure, her hands folded in her lap as she braced herself for the turbulent reunion she knew was coming not only for Dominic, but for Mariah, who had been spiraling under the weight of her past trauma and Ian Ward's insidious influence. Burrow moved efficiently through updates, coordinating with officers on the ground, keeping the parents informed without feeding their panic. The flight hummed with tension, each mile cutting through the uncertainty separating them from the child who had been torn out of his peaceful life and into the chaos Mariah could no longer see clearly. Back in Genoa City, far from the frantic race unfolding in the sky, another emotional reckoning was taking shape. Tessa Porter stood alone with Daniel Romalotti, her gaze heavy with a mixture of guilt and clarity that only arrives after a life has already splintered in too many directions. She had come to him with the intention of saying something final, something she owed herself. Her voice carried the calm of someone who had already cried, already broken, already pieced herself together just enough to stand upright again. She told Daniel she was leaving, that she needed to start a new life somewhere else, somewhere her identity wasn't tied to heartbreak, betrayal, or the shadow of her past choices. Daniel listened intently, unable to shake the complicated tangle of emotions inside him: sadness, longing, regret, and a quiet admiration for how steadfast she remained even after everything that had happened between them. "Have you heard anything about Mariah?" he asked gently, aware that the subject was a wound, but a necessary one. Tessa exhaled slowly, the breath escaping as if releasing a memory she wished she could silence. She explained that Mariah's car had been spotted, that Abby, Devin, and Sharon were already flying west, that the situation was escalating faster than anyone expected. Daniel, confused, concerned, asked why she hadn't gone with them, why she wasn't on that plane. After all, she and Mariah had once shared a bond deep enough to survive nearly anything. Tessa shook her head, her eyes lowering. "I didn't think it was a good idea," she admitted softly. Sharon had agreed with that assessment, both women understanding that the sight of Tessa might push Mariah into an even more unstable emotional state. "I just don't think I can face her right now," she added, her voice trembling in a way she rarely allowed. "After everything she's put me through, I'm so angry, but God, I still love her too." Those words revealed the heart of her turmoil. Her anger and compassion were hopelessly intertwined, and she couldn't unravel one without tightening the other. Facing Mariah now would not bring clarity, it would only reopen wounds that had barely begun to scar. Daniel stepped closer, burdened by a guilt he could not hide. "I can't help feeling responsible," he confessed, guilt bleeding through every syllable. He had played a part in the unraveling of Tessa's relationship, a part in her confusion, her choices, her rediscovery of old desires and forgotten pieces of herself. He had not meant to be a catalyst for damage, but he had become one anyway. Tessa, however, was firm, gentle, but unyielding. She placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "Don't do that," she urged. "Don't take this on yourself. I'm responsible for what I've done." "Not you." There was no bitterness in her voice, no regret aimed at him. Instead, there was a complicated tenderness. "You made me feel loved again," she whispered. "After so long feeling invisible, unwanted, afraid of wanting anything at all, you brought me back to life. I don't regret anything that happened between us." It was a declaration wrapped in sorrow, a confession delivered with gratitude and pain interwoven like threads of the same fabric. She did not deny the consequences of their choices. She simply refused to rewrite the emotional truth behind them. Their connection had been real, their mistakes had been real. And now the cost of those mistakes was unfolding in real time, on a plane heading west, where a missing child and a broken woman were hurtling toward a confrontation that could alter all their lives. Daniel felt the weight of her words settle into his chest, bittersweet and grounding. He wanted to fix something, anything, but he knew there were no simple repairs left to make. Tess's decision to build a new life was not born from recklessness. It was an attempt to step out from under the shadows of Mariah's unraveling, the guilt of their affair, and the overwhelming grief she had been carrying for too long. As she turned away, preparing to walk toward a future she still didn't fully understand, Daniel watched her with a quiet ache, knowing that sometimes the people who change you the most are the ones you cannot follow. And somewhere high above the desert, in a jet slicing through the fading daylight, the people still fighting to bring Dominic home tightened their resolve, unaware that back in Genoa City, another chapter of loss and transformation had already begun. On the plain, as the engines hummed beneath them and the lights of Genoa City faded behind, Abby finally allowed herself to exhale. The fear, the panic, the dread, none of it had eased, but being in the air at least meant they were moving in the right direction. She turned toward Sharon, her voice soft but weighted with sincerity. She confessed how grateful she was that Sharon had agreed to come, emphasizing that none of this was Mariah's fault in the way the legal world might interpret it. "Mariah isn't a criminal," Abby murmured, her eyes glassy with the strain of the last few hours. "We know that. She's clearly not well." Sharon nodded, her expression etched with the sorrow that only a mother who had watched her child fall apart piece by piece could understand. She agreed that Mariah needed help, not punishment, and she prayed, quietly but fervently, that this ordeal would resolve without violence, without tragedy, without any more wounds than the ones already inflicted on all of them. Detective James Burrow, seated a few feet away with his tablet open and connected to every available law enforcement network, lifted his gaze as a new alert flashed across the screen. The license plate finally had been captured clearly enough to confirm the pattern, confirming what they already suspected but desperately needed verified. "We're close," Burrow announced in a measured tone, though even he couldn't fully suppress the tension edging his voice. "This is almost over." He said it with a resolve meant to anchor the group, to give them a sense of control in a situation spiraling with unpredictable emotional consequences. Then another alert chimed. Burrow opened the notification, scanned it quickly, and relayed the update. The vehicle matching Mariah's had been spotted again. This time parked near a diner in a small town on the outskirts of New Mexico. The officers nearest the location were ready to move in. "It may be best," Burrow said carefully, "to let the officers on the ground handle this." "No," Abby's voice cracked through the cabin like a shard of lightning. She pushed forward in her seat, eyes burning with disbelief. "We can't let the police approach her first. That will terrify her and Dom." She clung to the idea that familiarity, not force, was the safest bridge back to reality for Mariah. The last thing she wanted was for flashing lights and raised voices to push Mariah deeper into panic, possibly even convincing her that escape was the only option left. Devin stepped in with a steady calm, his tone firm but compassionate. He agreed with Abby's fear and suggested a compromise that, as soon as the plane landed and they reached the diner, Sharon should be the first person to approach the car. Abby supported the idea wholeheartedly. "You're her mother," she reminded Sharon. "You're the one she responds to. You're the one she needs most right now." Burrow assured Sharon that officers would remain close enough to intervene if the situation became dangerous, but far enough to avoid alarming Mariah prematurely. Sharon hesitated, not out of fear for herself, but out of fear of failing her daughter again. Ultimately, however, she agreed. She knew she had to be the one to reach Mariah. She owed her that, at the very least. Meanwhile, somewhere along a long, dark road stretching through the desert's southwest, Dominic sat silently in the back seat while Mariah drove with a strange smile that flickered like a candle in a draft. The sky outside the car was pitch black, broken only by the faint glow of headlights and the distant outline of mountains. Mariah's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel as she attempted to maintain her version of calm, turning her head just enough to glance at Dominic. She called him Bowie, her voice sing-song, trying to inject excitement into the tension hanging between them. She told him he must be thrilled about their adventure, about everything ahead of them, about the world they would see together. Dom's response was immediate, sharp, filled with a frustration far too heavy for a child his age. "This isn't fun anymore," he said with a trembling defiance, "and my name isn't Bowie." He crossed his arms, his small body stiff, his voice cracking with the beginnings of tears. He didn't want another game. He didn't want another story about adventures or special names. He wanted his parents Devin and Abby, the people who had held him when he cried, who had warmed his milk, who had taught him his first words. "I don't want to play anymore," Dom added, each word rising with desperation. "And I don't want to go to another country. I miss my parents. I want to go home." Mariah's breath hitched. She tried to reassure him, though her voice quivered with the weight of everything unraveling inside her. She told him they couldn't go home. She told him his parents didn't want him back yet, not now, not until the game was finished. When he asked what he had done wrong, the question struck her like a blow. She told him he hadn't done anything. She insisted this was what they needed to do, that everything was under control, that Mexico was a beautiful place with so many things to see and experience. But Dominic wasn't listening anymore. He was scared, he was confused, and he no longer believed her. Outside the car, the desert stretched infinitely, the world narrowing into a small metal vehicle containing a woman lost in delusion and a child desperate for the truth. Inside, the emotional fault lines widened with every passing mile, carrying them both toward an inevitable collision, one that Abby, Devin, Sharon, and the detectives were racing to intercept before everything spun into a darkness none of them could undo.